All right, so continuing, hang on, let's scoot this over here. All right, continuing section 13.4. I told you back in the first section of this chapter that we had indefinite integrals and then we have definite integrals. Indefinite means that there was no little numbers right here and here. So now what we're going to do is introduce a definite integral. So basically what this means is that whatever variable you're in terms in, so I'm in terms of x, I want to evaluate this integral between x values of 0 and 1. So if I graph y equals 1 minus x, I get a line with a negative slope that hits the y-axis at 1. So that's what I got right here. And if you'll notice, this very handily makes the shape of a triangle. We don't need calculus to find the shape of a triangle because we actually have a geometric formula for that. So the question is, what is the area under the curve? So this would be a curve. Technically, it's a straight curve. And I'm finding the area between x values of 0 and 1 under that curve. And as a side note, you need to realize or understand that it is understood that you're chopping off area under the axis. Otherwise, you would have an infinite number of or infinite amount of area going down. So basically, if I shove in a 1 here, 1 minus 1 is 0. So I've got a point at 0, 1 and at 1, 0. So using geometry, what is the area of this triangle? The area of this triangle is half of the base, which is 1, is from 0 to 1, times the height, which is from 0 to 1. So it's 1 unit tall. So 1 times 1 is 1, times a half is, my area is 0.5. Now, what happens if it's not so pretty? So what we're going to do is introduce the concept of definite integrals. So I'm going to integrate this thing from 0 to 1. So if you don't know what to do, always do what you know how to do. So I know how to integrate. I'm going to integrate this thing from 0 to 1 of the integrand of 1 minus x dx. Okay, so how do we integrate? What's the integral of 1? It is x. Okay, minus, what's the integral of x? It is x squared over 2, and then I would have plus c, correct? So now I'm going to introduce these hard brackets, and those mean the integration is done. So since integration is done, I am now going to evaluate. So I'm going to take this top number, which is a 1, and evaluate, and then minus the bottom number, which is a 1, or sorry, which is a 0, just kidding, and evaluate. So you always evaluate top minus bottom. Okay, so shove in a 1. That gives me a 1 minus 1 squared over 2 plus c. Okay, minus, always subtract, evaluate at 0. So that gives me 0 minus 0 squared over 2 plus c. So I want you to notice a couple of things. First of all, 1 minus 1 over 2 is a half. Okay, so on this set of parentheses, I get 1/2 plus c. Minus, okay, on this one, I get 0 minus 0, 0, okay, plus c. But that negative distributes and changes that to a minus c. So what is your final answer? You have 1/2 plus c minus c. Well, your c's are going to cancel out. So side note, with definite integration, when you have, these are actually called limits of integration, those little numbers right there, your plus and your c's will always reduce out, always. And so it's understood that they're there, but it's kind of a waste of my time to write them. So I'm not going to write them. Bottom line is I use calculus to find out that the area under the curve is a half. Well, what did I find out in geometry world? I found out that the area under the curve is a half. Okay, so that is where we're headed after this test. Well, what we're going to do for number 5 is I'm just going to walk you through it again. Okay, so this says the marginal revenue function has x measured in years, and the marginal revenue function of x in hundreds of dollars per year. Okay, use numerical integration, or definite integration in our case, to find the total revenue over the given period. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, they gave me some limits of integration. So I'm going to integrate this thing from 0 to 6. And then if I integrate the marginal revenue function, I'll get the initial revenue function. Okay, so if you remember when we took a derivative of revenue, we got marginal revenue. So we're undoing that. So my function is 0.06 x to the third plus, I should not have done this, and it's a minus, what the heck? All right, minus 0.9 x squared plus 9x dx. Okay, so all I did was copy this down. That's my integrand. The values that I'm integrating between are from 0 to 6. So this is a definite integral, and these are my limits of integration. And now I just do what I did on the last problem. I'm going to integrate. So 0.06 x to the fourth over 4. So 0.06 x to the fourth over 4. And I'll clean that up in just a second. Minus, this will become 0.9 x to the third over 3. And this will become 9x squared over 2. And remember that plus c is there. It's just a waste of my time to write it. So I use hard brackets to state that I've taken the integral. So integration is done. The hard brackets say that that's where I'm at. And I'm going to integrate this thing from 0 to 6. Now, you also want to pay attention to what happens mathematically. What happens if I shove in a 0 on all three of these terms? It just zeroes out. Okay, so that is a marvelous little benefit there because I really don't have to integrate by 0, but I'm going to set it up just so that I don't lose you. But what I'm going to do is shove in a 6 first. So I've got a 0.06 times 6 to the fourth over 4 minus 0.9 times 6 to the third over 3 plus 9 times 6 squared over 2. So that's evaluating by 6 minus, now evaluate by 0, and that whole thing zeroes out. Okay, so that's what you need to know there. Now, when I slap this in my calculator, I will end up with 0.06 times 6 raised to the fourth power divided by 4 is going to give me 1944 minus, and then I'm going to have 0.9 times 6 raised to the third power and divide that by 3, and I'll get 64.8. And then I'll have plus 9 times 6 squared, which is 36, divided by 2 gives me 162. Okay, so, and then remember that's just minus 0, because when you evaluate with 0, it goes away. So now I've got a 1944 minus 64.8 plus 162 gives me an answer of 116.64. And you're reporting that in hundreds. And so your answer is your total revenue is times 100 should be 11,664. And that is your final answer. So that now you're ready for your next test and you can go from there. So let me know if you have questions.